Have you ever noticed how unbelievably dangerous it is to be a mother in anime? It's become such a meme that being a mom in anime is basically a death sentence. Now, most people will say it's just a way to create trauma, and it's really not that deep. Humans are a result of the socio-cultural context that we exist in, and every single decision that we make, conscious or not, is directly influenced by these factors. So saying something's not that deep, that just doesn't work for me. But to understand why anime keeps removing mothers specifically, we first need to understand what mothers represent in Japanese culture. I want to first address the oversimplification that dead parents are just good and easy storytelling. Now, the parentless main character trope is not something that is exclusive to anime, and in fact, it's really common across various forms of media. Removing parents instantly creates sympathy, independence, freedom, adventure, conflict, something to fight for. Plus, a character being an orphan just automatically sets them apart from the norm and makes them other. But basically, parents solve problems, stories need problems. So remove the parents, so writers remove parents. Okay, well this explains dead parents, but not why moms specifically disappear so often in anime. I feel like I should address with this next part that I am not by any means discounting the role of a father in life in general and specifically in anime. In fact, fatherhood plays a very essential and pivotal role in anime, but that's a topic for a different video because today I'm just addressing motherhood. To first explain the significance of mothers, we first need to understand attachment. Attachment is basically a strong emotional bond that is formed between a child and their caregiver, and this helps them feel safe, loved, and protected. Therefore, having a secure attachment style is vitally important for healthy human development. In fact, there is a very famous psychology experiment conducted by Harry Harlow that focuses on this very premise. To put it as simply as possible, Harlow studied attachment by giving infant monkeys two different surrogate mothers. There's one that was a wire mother that provided food, so sustenance, and the other one was a soft cloth mother that provided comfort. The monkeys preferred the cloth mother and sought her when frightened, which demonstrates that attachment relies on comfort and security rather than just addressing basic needs. The experiments also found that the monkeys raised without normal caregiving ended up developing serious emotional and social problems. So the research basically demonstrated that secure attachment and responsive caregiving are essential for healthy social, emotional, and cognitive development. Attachment's not a luxury, it is survival. I do feel like I need to note though that these experiments are considered a little controversial now just due to the animal cruelty, so just throw that in there. Anyways, secure attachment leads to emotional regulation, confidence, identity exploration, and healthy relationships. Loss of attachment changes development. But here is what I found interesting. So despite attachment being universally human, the meaning of motherhood itself does vary depending on culture. So I decided to look into what motherhood represents in Japan compared to a Western framework, which is what I'm used to. While looking into this, I actually found some really interesting information that show the main differences between the two. And I'm gonna first address the Western style of motherhood. So with the Western model, the mother teaches independence basically from the time of birth. So Western babies are viewed as initially dependent on their mother, and the goal is to eventually get them to move away from that, teach them their independence. Remember that, because it's going to come up later. Some common characteristics of the Western motherhood model include nurturing, safety, comfort. This is true for the Japanese model as well. I think this is honestly maybe universal. But one characteristic that is specific to the Western model is self-expression being valued and taught. Additionally, date nights and having a babysitter are pretty widely accepted in Western cultures. This is a bit of an overgeneralization, but still. And babies often have their own bedrooms. We have nurseries, they have cribs, they sleep separately. One interesting statistic I found reflected that Western moms usually on average spend about 24 hours per week away from their baby. I couldn't figure out exactly if that was referring to sleeping, getting out of the house. I wasn't quite clear on that, but I thought I would note it. In addition, there are different parenting styles and models in general, but I saw that mostly in Western motherhood, there is a parenting style called distal parenting, which places a strong emphasis on eye contact and communication through facial expressions and words. Western babies slowly become masters over their environment through self-expression, self-recognition, and assertiveness. Children basically learn, my thoughts are separate from yours. So now that we've talked about the Western model, let's switch to what we're here for, the Japanese model of motherhood. So if you'll remember what I said earlier about Western babies being viewed as initially dependent and needing to become independent, it is the opposite in Japan. So basically, they view babies as coming out of the womb being independent, and they want to teach that kid dependence on the mother and the family unit. Some common characteristics of the Japanese model of motherhood, once again, safety, nurturing, comfort, universe stuff. But unlike the Western model, instead of focusing on self-expression, this model focuses on emotional regulation. Another key difference between the two is that Japanese motherhood basically requires total dedication. So they are co-sleeping, co-bathing, date nights, babysitters. That is not acceptable for pretty much the first 2 years of a child's life. I do want to note that I have seen a lot of talk that a lot of the more patriarchal aspects of Japanese society are slowly getting moved away from because more moms are full-time working mothers. So once again, this is a bit of an overgeneralization, but it's what I found. And I think this is kind of represented because remember, with Western, 24 hours per week on average. In Japan, it is 2 hours per week. 2 hours. That's insane. Also, the model that is mostly used in Japan is proximal parenting, which is associated with consistent and prolonged body contact between the baby and the mother. The goal is not immediate autonomy. It is emotional harmony. Japanese babies become masters over their emotions and waiting until their needs are met by their mother. So children learn empathy and self-regulation before they learn independence. So if motherhood symbolizes home, then removing the mother symbolically also removes the home, which is incredibly powerful for storytelling. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm not the type of person to accept a "it's not that deep" explanation. So I got curious and I wanted to understand why it is such a common storytelling device just to begin with. Specifically with Japanese culture. But one interesting reason I found, and some of this, I'm not gonna lie y'all, I might be reaching a little bit, but I'm also not. In post-war Japan, many families were completely disrupted. Fathers left to go fight, kids were left with their mothers, moms worked. Sometimes their families just died in general and they became orphans. I also started thinking that there are a lot of traditional folk tales that have the parentless trope happening. And so I got curious about why that is too. And for one, there was a high mortality rate in general. Mothers often died during childbirth, and if they didn't die during childbirth, they didn't live very long lives. So children often grew up without a mother. This was extremely common. In addition, there was economic hardship. So extreme poverty often led to families abandoning their children because they simply could not take care of it and could not feed it. So by looking into the past, we're able to see that modern stories kind of inherited these structures, not necessarily consciously, but culturally. Now that I've addressed some of the real world influences, both in the past and the present, we're going to shift back to anime and how those factors directly influence the storytelling in anime. So what happens when the mother disappears? Well, without a mother, characters often become loud, stubborn, self-reliant, lonely, impulsive, a bit socially strange. And this is such a common writing trope that we see for main characters, but why? So let's put attachment to the side for a moment, okay? How do humans learn? How do kids learn? Through proper socialization. And how does socialization happen? Through our parents, primarily, and secondly, our peers. So in the absence of a mother or parents or peers, the child is naturally going to struggle with understanding how to interact with society and adhere to standard socio-cultural norms. Another interesting observation that I made, a lot of male protagonists in general, but especially without moms, tend to have this weirdness surrounding female interaction, and I posit that this is due to their lack of maternal interaction. Many protagonists often misunderstand women, and this can be seen in a lot of ways. I think one, a lot of times they misread and misunderstand or flat out ignore signals from female relationships that they have. And I think this goes both ways. We've seen main characters where there is a female character obviously hitting on them in a romantic way, and they are completely oblivious. And then we've also seen male protagonists have a female character who is giving them no sign at all that they are interested romantically, and they cannot take the hint. Many protagonists also tend to idolize women and search for a motherly figure, whether this is a conscious decision or not, to meet their emotional needs. This brings me to my last point, that main characters in this demographic often struggle with expressing emotions in a healthy way. And this can present as emotional outbursts, emotional dysregulation, and also just being flat out emotionless. I do really want to emphasize that these characteristics and these traits that I am referring to are not psychologically inevitable for people or characters that don't have a mom or don't have parents. I think that is overgeneralizing, and I think that is reaching a bit. And I also think it's just kind of a rude assumption. I mention this because these are just recurring character archetypes that anime repeatedly associates with characters who grow up without maternal support. It also helps the audience kind of track the character's growth and development, because we're able to see where they start, and then we're able to see how they progress as they do form various types of relationship and they gain life experience. So it serves as kind of a benchmark in a way. Moving on to some symbolism, the mother's death represents way more than just a loss. I've talked ad nauseum about how a mother represents emotional security, emotional safety, childhood, and innocence. So killing her basically means that the childhood is over, and this serves as a catalyst for the character's growth and for their journey. Some examples that came to mind when I was writing this was Full Metal Alchemist. Trisha's death isn't just tragic in Full Metal, it also just straight up becomes Edward's obsession. In Hunter x Hunter, Gon literally leaves to find another purpose. Attack on Titan, Carla's death, pivotal to the plot, transforms the entire story. Bleach, Ichigo's entire identity revolves around Masaki, his mother. Baki, his mother's affection is twisted and ultimately destroyed. Evangelion, Shinji's entire emotional world revolves around the absence of parental love and guidance. And in One Piece, Luffy never really had a traditional family. His emotional security comes from found family, which leads me into my next point. Found family replaces motherhood in anime. One of anime's biggest themes surrounds found family, because once the mother is gone, someone has to replace what she represented. So instead, we get mentors, we get friends, crews, teams, guilds. The emotional support shifts from biological family to chosen family. And that's one of anime's defining themes. We can choose who our family is. The mother symbolizes more than just a parent. She symbolizes home, emotional security, dependence, childhood. So when anime removes them, it isn't just creating trauma. It actually carries such a symbolic weight for the characters, because it's forcing a character to leave a childhood behind before they're ready. And that's why so many anime begin in the same way. Because the hero doesn't just lose a mother, they lose the place where they were the safest. And the rest of the story ultimately is about trying to find that feeling again. And I think that's something that resonates with people. Humans need humans. And when you grow up in isolation or without a parent, without friends, you are going to yearn for those connections, even though you might not know how to form them and maintain them. And that's what makes it such a powerful trope, and it's something that I think fundamentally invokes an emotional response with viewers. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really had fun doing this one, because for the probably 15th time, I love doing deep dives into random stuff. I will never accept it's not that deep. Some things, yeah, sure. But when something is this common and this significant in a medium, there's a why. And it's not a cop-out of, well, it's just good storytelling. No. Because anyone could write that. No. It's influenced by stuff. Anyway, if you liked what you saw, leave a like, leave a subscribe, or comment what you think. If you have anything that you would like to add, if anybody else is interested, there are a lot of really cool articles out there. Look into it. See you next time.